Since the beginning of the day, 78 clashes have been recorded along the entire front line, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Russians attacked Ukrainian positions 14 times in the Lyman direction, and on the Toretsk section of the front, the enemy tried to advance 7 times, but without success. The defense forces repelled 5 more Russian attacks in a Novopovlivka direction near 5 settlements. There is relative calm only on the Orikhiv bridgehead. The Ukrainian General Staff did not record a single Russian assault. Ukrainian soldiers say that the Russians have intensified assaults on Kostiantynivka in the Donetsk region, using a large number of attack and reconnaissance drones. And the Russian army remains most active in attacking near Pokrovsk. According to the Ukrainian military command, since the beginning of the day, the invaders have tried 28 times to push Ukrainian defenders from their positions. Military analysts note that at this point, both sides are trying to exhaust the enemy's resources.
They're trying to cut off the supply routes where we bring in what we need, where we evaluate the wounded, carry out partial rotations so people can get some rest, basically. We started doing this about 2 months ago, attacking the Russian supply routes. They saw how effective this actually is, what kind of advantage it gives us, and how much it complicates combat operations for the Russians. So they basically decided to do the same thing.
Russian generals have not given up on their ambitious plans to take full control of Myrnorad and Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, as well as to advance through the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, military experts emphasize. To achieve this, the Russians are deploying additional resources.
Several thousand Russian servicemen who were recently stationed in the Sumy region, as well as operating in the north of the Kharkiv region, have now been relocated to the southern regions of our country and are already engaged in active combat there. By the way, I think it's no coincidence that the Russians so quickly and urgently withdrew their forces and equipment after the exercises in the Republic of Belarus. I'm referring to the large-scale maneuvers of the Russian and Belarusian armies, Zapad 2025. I think most of these Russian resources have already been sent to combat units.
970 Russian servicemen were eliminated by the defense forces of Ukraine over the past day. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have exceeded 1,104,500 soldiers. In addition, over the past day, Ukrainian defenders turned 2 tanks, 43 artillery systems, and 1 enemy multiple rocket launcher into scrap metal, destroyed 2 aircraft, as well as 130 units of Russian automotive equipment.
Joined by Oleksiy Hetman, retired Major National Guard Ukraine military analyst. Oleksiy, welcome Freedom Broadcast.
Hello.
Good evening.
Oleksiy, so I'll start about Ukraine, but from a bit of a different angle. What do you think? Why does Trump have such optimism, I'll put it cautiously optimism, regarding in particular the situation at the front, saying that the Ukrainian army is successfully holding back the powerful Russian army? What do you think?
Well, President Zelensky put it very delicately when they talked about this, saying that it's very good that Trump is getting truthful information about what's happening on the front line. We know, according to our intelligence, let's put it that way, that even the information going from the Russian army's general staff to Putin is not entirely truthful. They intercepted this information in a certain way. And it turned out that even what is passed on to Putin doesn't match reality. All the more so, what was told to Putin by Trump about some kind of super capability of the Russian army also didn't correspond to what was actually happening. So Trump, on the one hand, because the information he was receiving, including from American intelligence, was confirmed by our intelligence and our data, but what the Russians were saying was not confirmed. So, naturally, he concluded, I think he said that the Russian army is like a paper tiger. I believe that's how he put it. Well, something like that. On paper, everything looks great, but for 3.5 years, they haven't been able to achieve any of their goals. And that's why the situation there is completely different from what, let's say, Trump thought even just a few weeks ago. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, there is information that a certain amount of emotional and political pressure has started, not just from the Democrats, but also from the Republicans in the United States. Because Trump's position toward the Russian Federation, which has been recognized as an aggressor country, is rather strange. 141 countries. NATO, if you will. The United Nations voted for this. There is a resolution of the General Assembly, the United Nations, about what constitutes aggression. Well, everyone already knows about it. A lot of people have heard of 3314, those combinations of numbers. That's the resolution where aggression is defined. So, all of this together. And besides, there's this assumption that next year there will be Senate elections. Yes, in the United States. In a year and a month, and about a year before that, the election campaign starts. Trump started earlier, as they say. He went on the offensive. Maybe this is already part of the election campaign. But if he and the Republican Party run their campaign based on friendship with the Russian Federation, then most likely they'll lose the election. That's why he made a complete 180 and said that we can, even by military means, reach the 1991 borders and even go further. But in my opinion, he went too far with that. We're not planning to go any further. We need the Russian swamps like a dog needs a stick. Well, on the other hand, there was also a speech at the General Assembly by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, well, the Secretary of State of the United States, as they call it, Mark Antonio Rubio. He talked about diplomatic. A way to end the war. Well, you know, someone already said, I can't remember who, that Ferry doesn't play the good cop, bad cop game. And so Trump is playing the good cop for us, while Rubio is the bad cop. Basically, we're still moving in the same direction anyway. And it's actually pretty good that, most likely, after such statements, there won't be any delays with the delivery of weapons to us, which the Europeans are paying for. Well, you see, Trump is also pursuing his own business interests here. I think there won't be any delays. Besides, we heard what he said, literally translated, in any case, that the Europeans are financing a war against themselves. So, in this case, it's two positives in one for us. First of all, he already sees that we're not just some local conflict over there, but that we're being protected by Europe, and that, essentially, the war is being waged against Europe. It's just the eastern flank, and they're also funding it, buying energy resources. Why 2 in 1? Because if the Europeans don't buy Russian gas, they still have to buy energy resources somewhere, and most likely, that'll be liquefied Russian gas from the United States. So here, you see, Trump has two business interests, to increase gas sales to Europe and also to sell more weapons. Basically, both options work for us.
This is an outrageous case, of course. It's not the only one during the entire war between Russia and Ukraine, but at the same time, you can't just normalize it or simply lump such cases together. In Shandryhov, Donetsk region, Russian occupiers shot a family of civilians and took a child hostage. This was reported by the 3rd Army Corps of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Radio intercepts revealed that even before the assault on the settlement began, a Russian commander with the call sign Bali gave the order to eliminate the civilian population, along with instructions to act quickly and kill everyone indiscriminately. After that, Russian soldiers entered a residential house, shot the child's parents, and the invaders kidnapped the girl. They continued their assault operations while holding her hostage to prevent any fire being directed at them.
Well, I'll also add that the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, reported that he sent official letters to the UN and the International Committee of the Red Cross regarding the shooting of a civilian family by Russians and the use of a child as a human shield in the Donetsk region.
So, against the backdrop of Donald Trump's statements about how great Ukraine is at really putting up a quality defense, an attack by such a powerful army as Russia makes this story sound, even more blasphemous, because in reality, the armed forces of Ukraine are fighting back and giving a tangible response to the Russian army, but the Russian army knows absolutely nothing about the rules of warfare. How this is classified under international law, we've known for a long time. These are war crimes. And I think that even this single case is enough reason for Russia to bear and feel responsibility for continuing the war. Alexei, what do you truly think, after almost 4 long and arduous years of this devastating war, can compelling stories like this, with their profound and deeply moving impact, still have a truly sobering and impactful effect on Ukraine's international partners, those who are still actively debating whether to completely give up their reliance on Russian energy resources, whether to decisively set new and firm deadlines for Vladimir Putin, or whether they should simply continue to wait and observe the unfolding situation?
Russian propaganda is working very actively in Poland and Germany. Our main intelligence directorate warned us about this, that there would be increased informational pressure on European countries. How does this affect the war? A certain percentage of the population in these countries is unsure whether or not they should support our country. If the number of people who, let's say, don't support, not necessarily oppose, but simply don't support military aid to our country grows, it affects the decisions made by the country's leadership. After all, they have to take into account the opinions of their citizens. That's how things work in democratic systems. I don't remember which party it was in Germany, to be honest. Representatives of a specific party. There was information circulating online after some talk show where the question was raised, why is it that such a large number of Germans are not willing to take up arms and defend their own country, not to mention going east to defend Europe where we are fighting? So he answered that if anything happens, maybe there will be an occupation, but taking up arms means dying. So what's better, to end up under occupation or to die? Of course, it's better to end up under occupation. These are people with a Prussian spirit saying this. These are representatives of certain political circles in Germany saying this. That's how important it is, the information being spread that if you end up under occupation. Those Germans who say such things are not to be respected because they'll come and, at best, they'll just take your property and maybe won't even kill anyone. And if they just remember the case in Bucha when some guy was just waiting. There was information that he was waiting and happily welcomed the Russians. They sat there at the table, then asked him for more vodka. He said there was no more vodka, and they just grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Well, that's how they'll behave if the war, for example, comes to Germany. So, if someone chooses disgrace between war and disgrace, they'll end up with both disgrace and war. That's well known. Churchill said sensible things, and he could put them quite eloquently. It's no wonder he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. So that's the mood right now. It's not great that in Europe we have to do counter-propaganda. And regarding this kind of information, well, that's exactly what counter-propaganda is. To explain to people that, as President Trump says, we're fighting for all of Europe. We're defending all of Europe. And we need Russia's help. They're criminals. There are a bunch of them over there. We're collecting all this evidence. We're preparing for a future tribunal. The only thing is, the verdict of this tribunal, unlike, say, the Nuremberg trials after World War II, will probably take a very long time to read, because there's just so much. Do you know what a war crime is? I won't go into this in detail. Anyone interested can look up what falls under this category. What qualifies as a war crime? It's not just about killings, not just about looting. There are more than 40 points, if I remember correctly. The Russians have committed every single one of them. That's enough for a life sentence. For many, let's say, participants in this war, starting from those who gave the orders to those who carried out illegal orders because, well, they're criminal because they're carrying out criminal. Giving such an order is also a crime. The people who were told to shoot civilians knew perfectly well that this was a war crime. And if they didn't know, ignorance of the law doesn't exempt you from responsibility. They're still criminals, and they will be punished either through a tribunal or, in another way, by our GUR.
Alexei, let's talk about the hottest spots on the front line. Ukrainian soldiers are saying that the occupiers have been reinforced. There are assault operations near Kostiantynivka in the Donetsk region, with a large number of strike and reconnaissance drones being used. So, Ukrainian fighters are also saying that the Russians have now changed their tactics. In the Kramatorsk direction, particularly back in August, small Russian reconnaissance groups and sometimes armored vehicles operated south of Kostiantynivka. Now, the Russians have concentrated their forces near roads and logistical routes, and their assault groups are shielded by large swarms of drones of various types. But now, even the Russians themselves admit it, even their generals, though I don't want to name names, that the war has reached a deadlock, becoming positional like in World War I. And Russia hasn't made any territorial gains in this war for the past several months. Everything has just stalled. Right now, the Russians are trying by any means necessary, fair or foul, to cut off and sever the logistical routes to those pockets of Ukrainian defense resistance, like Pokrovsk, Myrnohrad, and Kostiantynivka, specifically by attacking the roads. What is your opinion about such statements and about the overall situation and Russian tactics?
From my point of view, this is completely logical. When the front line is stabilized, then. When the war turns into a war of attrition, naturally, those on the front line who receive less and don't get everything they need on time will be depleted faster. Ammunition, equipment, fuel, and lubricants, everything necessary to conduct even a positional war, which is also quite exhausting. You need a lot there, artillery, drones, so basically, they. The actions of the Star Vision operation are logical. They are trying to cut off the logistical routes where we bring in what we need, evaluate the wounded, and carry out partial rotations so people can get some rest. Basically, we started doing this about 2 months ago, attacking the Russians' logistical routes. They observed, saw how effective this actually is, what kind of advantage it gives us, and how much it complicates things. So, for the Russians, combat operations became more difficult, and they decided to basically do the same thing. Well, whether it works out for them or not, at least for now, it will definitely make things more complicated for us in some ways. Our logistics. Well, we see this too, we understand it, and obviously, we will counteract it. How? Well, it means using less equipment, advancing in small groups, moving at night, and so on. In other words, there are a whole bunch of tactical solutions. And a professional commander will come up with something, some kind of know-how. You know, it really annoys military people when civilians start talking about some kind of know-how or something else like that. There is military science, real science. It lays out the procedures, just like medical science does. There's a protocol for what needs to be done to remove an appendix. You have to take certain steps. Yes, there are some nuances where you need to show some ingenuity or do something unexpected. But, as a rule, these are actions according to protocol. If a surgeon removing an appendix suddenly started, say, jumping on one leg to remove it, or tried to remove the appendix, through some other place, I don't think the patient would be very happy. It's the same in the army. You only need to make those kinds of super decisions when all the standard protocols have already been followed. That's more like a bonus, something extra, a sign of mastery. But you shouldn't replace standard procedures with some unclear actions that are hidden behind the word know-how. When you ask what they mean, they say, well, something creative, something new. Honestly, it just annoys me.
Alexei, we have 1 minute left. I'd like to clarify one more thing with you. The spokesperson for the group of troops stationed in the southernmost parts of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions said that the Russians have become more active in the settlements adjacent to the Kakhovka reservoir. Plavny, Stepnohursk is even further, and Pridniprovsk, I think, right? And then he said that in that case, there might be a threat to the outskirts of Zaporizhia. Well, the media picked it up, twisted it around, And now we have these kinds of headlines. The Russians are threatening the outskirts of Zaporizhia, the suburbs of Zaporizhia, and so on. What would actually have to happen for the Russians to really threaten the outskirts of Zaporizhia?
A miracle. A miracle would have to happen. It won't happen. At least. It's possible that the Zaporizhia direction, President Zelensky mentioned this, is one of the possible directions for the 2 more offensives the Russians are planning to carry out this year. What could these directions be? Where are they concentrating their forces? They have been concentrating in the Kupiansk direction, the Lyman direction, the Pokrovsk direction, and, accordingly, the Zaporizhia direction. What capabilities do they have there? Minimal. Theoretically, they could reach the outskirts of Zaporizhia. You can say anything you want, even that somewhere dinosaurs still exist. But in practice, the probability is very low.
Thank you for the good news.
Thank you.
Alexei Hetman, Major of the National Guard of Ukraine, was in touch.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.